Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on why leadership fail at change management. We are in each other's company now for the next 30 minutes and I'm really excited to showcase how you can equip yourself with actionable insights and strategies to avoid the common pitfalls and steer your organization towards successful change. My name is Sam Cooper. I'm the head of marketing at Changing Social, and with me today I have my wonderful colleague and head of adoption and change management, Ed Sheath, who you will meet in just a moment. But what I'll do is I will drop both of our emails into the chat for you now, and please do feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. And finally, I will also be monitoring the Q&A for you today. So quick note about housekeeping before we get started, and in particular, a couple of options that may help during this webinar. So if you would like to see live captions during this presentation, please turn the feature on using the settings cog, choose captions/subtitles from the list, and then you can select from your preferred language options. You are also invited to ask questions throughout the webinar, and this can be done through selecting the chat icon, then selecting the box showing ask a question. You can then type in your question and choose whether to add a name or ask anonymously, and you can also send that by selecting the send option as shown as the paper aeroplane icon. So we will answer questions at the end of today's webinar, so please do feel free to ask questions throughout. But for now, what I'll do is I'll pass you over to Ed to get us started with today's session. Over to you, Ed.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Much appreciated. Happy Wednesday, everyone. It is the first of the month as well, so I hope November is treating you well. And on a bit of a side note, it's also officially Copilot Day from Microsoft as well, which I'm sure you've all heard in the news. And thank you for taking the sort of next 20 minutes to join me and the other attendees on what should be a slightly fun, potentially thought-provoking webinar on why leadership fail at change management. And it might not be all that you think. There's three things we're going to cover off today. What does the theory and data tell us around leadership and change management? I've got some personal experience to throw in the mix, what we've seen at our clients, both here at Changing Social and at my time at Microsoft, and some actionable insights to lead change. Some things that you can go away with today, whether your change project is big or small, whether it's technology, people or process focused. So it's not necessarily all technology focused. There are lessons here that we can apply to all of our working days from regardless of the projects. A little bit about myself. Firstly, it's probably the best photo anyone's ever taken of me, and it's definitely been photoshopped. And a few things about my experience and what I've done over the years. So ProSci certified change manager. I had the pleasure of working at Microsoft for about a decade. I counted up that I've done over 20 end-to-end change projects. Some of them have lasted sort of 6 to 7 weeks. Others have lasted 1 to 2 years. And I'm a proud owner of a golden retriever. If you're a dog person, throw it in the chat. If you're a cat person, throw it in the chat. And last time we also had someone who had a vivarium with, I think, an iguana in it as well. So all kinds of pets are welcome here. Jumping into the content then. I mentioned we'd start with the theory and data. As we go through, as Sam already mentioned, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and we'll jump in, and Sam will interrupt me, no doubt, and I can jump in and answer those questions. It is not death by PowerPoint, I promise. It is, however, just a few thought-provoking bullet points just to make us all think. The leadership side of change, what does it mean? What do we know? What do we see? And in order to set the scene accordingly, it's probably worth starting with a bit of a definition and some assumptions that we often hear around leadership. And it took probably 20 minutes with my most recent group for us to come to an agreement on what leadership actually means. And I think it will probably depend who you are, where you are, what the situation is, whether you're leading an individual, whether you're leading a group, etc. But this sentence resonated well with most of the people that I've spoken to. It's the ability of an individual or a group of people to influence and guide others. So it's the ability of an individual or a group to influence and guide others. And I think when we're in the corporate environment, especially if we're thinking of potentially public sector, and I have done some work with some forces before, that there are some potential assumptions that go along with this. They're not necessarily misconceptions, but there are potentially some assumptions. And the ones we see the most is leadership must and has to come from the top. Leaders need to take more responsibility for the change, whether they are doing it small, medium, or large, and whether it touches people, process, or technology. We need a key person to take ownership. And finally, probably the biggest assumption of all is leadership equals followship. Some of these are true. They're not all necessarily true in every circumstance, and some of them change per area, depending on the culture, depending on the structure. But the big piece here, it's not necessarily down to an individual, and it can also be a group of people. We'll take a look in a moment at some examples of where I've seen things work well and where I've seen things work not so well. We'll also have a look at what actions we can take, as I mentioned, in some of the data. But the main takeaway here, the more people together working to influence a change, the easier we're going to find it as we go through any change curve in any position in any organization, whether that's from the local parents association at school trying to do a change, all the way through to a massive enterprise thinking about potentially rolling out Copilot or making better use of 365 that they currently have. The more people on side, the bigger that coalition, the bigger that group, the stronger leadership will be as a sweeping statement. So the data, what have we seen being published around leadership and failure, and what potential risks does it bring? Now, there's three main resources that are going to come up on the screen, and it is quite a varying range of percentages. We see on the left, ProSci, probably the most famous one associated with Microsoft projects over the last few years, mentions the 70% mark. And then if we go all the way to the end of the Forbes survey, they mention that 54% of change fails if there's a lack of leadership and support. And at the absolute extreme, bang in the middle, the Change Management Institute mentioned 90% of change projects fail when leadership is not clear and effective. Now, I think all of these can be taken with a little pinch of salt. They are all surveyed across various different groups with various different intents and across various different years. Some of these were done pre-pandemic, some of them were done post-pandemic. But if we take the best case scenario, Forbes is suggesting that only 46% of projects will be successful if the leadership side of things is still lacking. That's a huge amount of potential left on the table, and I don't think anyone would like to run a project with 54% risk of failure. Thinking back to that slide before, that leadership doesn't necessarily have to come down to one person being on the hook. It doesn't necessarily have to come down to that one clear, shining, bright star of executive leadership. And certainly in the next couple of slides, we will see where it's worked well before, and that group of people leading is more effective necessarily than just one. Some interesting points here. If anyone has some real data that they would also like to show, if they've got experience, please throw it in the chat, engage. Sam might be able to comment back. He's been exposed to a lot of change management recently, but some food for thought. I personally would operate on the 54% that change projects will fail if there's no leadership. However, it's a larger organization with lots of different subgroups across lots of different cultures and areas. You are likely going to need a group of leaders across that entire organization to successfully drive change. So therefore, the impact might be even higher should that leadership piece not be clearly supported. So I've been reflecting over the last sort of 20-ish projects I've done, all from the very first one down to the ones that we've started in the last few months here at Changing Social. I also asked my team, so I'm fortunate enough to have about 6 or 7 change managers in the practice here at Changing Social. That's across the UK and US. And I just asked them, what do we think are the top 3 things that get overlooked when it comes to leadership? Regardless if it's a single person trying to be that guiding star and building that coalition, or if it's a group of people that we engage with on a weekly basis. Maybe we have a successful change board and a change coalition that come together, or maybe we have that one person that's really influential and gets people to come on that journey with them. So starting with number 3, so the most or least most important one that we were able to highlight over the last few weeks. Forgetting it's about the people. We're asking people to change what they do. We're asking people to take a moment out of their day where the day job doesn't stop, where the demands on their time don't change, and we're inputting another request for that person. Regardless of how effective we think we have been at communicating, regardless of how well we think we are doing, it is always an individual choice on whether someone will change. Attendance to communications events, attendance to training events does not necessarily mean that that person will change. And there's a whole host of multiple factors that will come into that. There is a great quote, I think it's in the Change Management Institute that published it. 5 million on technology and 100K on employment engagement typically makes for poor adoption. Now, I don't have a good figure on how much you should spend on change, but you've got to think about the investment, but more importantly, how much of someone's day are we changing from A to B? How much are they going to have to actively learn? How much are they going to have to step away from their day job to absorb all of the information that we're giving them? And not to mention, we're probably not the only change project happening in that organization at the time. And that reflects even further back to that conversation around leadership. Lost in the noise. This is one that I've certainly seen numerous times. There is a marketing rule of 7 that you need to see something 7 times in order to act. We won't talk about how many times my other half has asked me to put the bins out. However, the rule of 7 definitely applies, whether that is an email, a poster, that team meeting, that town hall, every available option talking of the change that is coming. But more importantly, it's sometimes talking about the change itself. So not necessarily we are changing to teams, but that we are going through change and we recognize that it's going to have an impact. Talking directly to the fact that a specific and targeted project is going to disrupt people's day-to-day ways of working. We say we live in a constant environment of change. If anyone has a smartphone or a device or a smart TV, it's updating probably once every week, possibly 2 or 3 times in that. And we take those updates for granted. They get pushed to us and there's not much we can do about it. However, changes at work, we often need to proactively engage as an individual. And being lost in the noise that we haven't seen a specific change, or it only got communicated once and I happen to be on leave, and other priorities that keep coming through, we do have to keep hammering home a change is happening so that we capture as much attention and as much of people's desire as possible. And we'll talk about getting people on the hook a little later on. Finally, and this is the kicker, if there's only one thing you take away from today, permission to take time. Now, leaders can help unlock this, and leadership can also help this become a reality. And I'm just going to touch on those 2 words. So leaders and then leadership. So leaders, whether you're a team leader, a department leader, an area leader, or a senior executive leading a huge change program, we must give people time to learn. We've all probably heard of the 10,000 hour rule. Don't think we need to go that extreme, but we are going to have to give people a chance to breathe, look, listen, learn, and try. ProSide talked through the ADKAR model where we think about our knowledge versus our ability. Knowing something is very different to be able to do something. I know the rules of football. I know exactly how and what I should be doing, but I cannot kick that ball in the direction I desire for love nor money because I've never practiced. We need to do pretty much the same when it comes to any change. We need to give people the knowledge and the time to practice and build their ability. It is the number one that gets overlooked. A 1-hour training session does not necessarily correlate to 1 hour's worth of ability and capability out of the back. That might mean sacrificing a few team meetings for that extra hour of people learning. It might mean clearing out a Friday or a no meeting Monday, as we've started to see a trend of recently, so that people have an opportunity to learn and put into play what they've started to see. One of the things we hear a lot here at Changing Social is we rolled Microsoft 365 out, we don't think we're getting the most return on investment and that people might not be using it efficiently and effectively. If those people were given a half day and some freedom on YouTube, you might find some quite neat use cases coming out. If those people were given a week with us, with scenario success, where we come in and we work side by side, you'll probably find quite a lot of impact and a very rapid scale of capability and return on investment with people given that time. Moving on, I wanted to share a customer story. This was one where there was a potential lack of leadership, and that's coming to that second part of those two words. So I mentioned around the leader enabling, but the leadership piece is you don't necessarily have to be in that senior role to enable others. And leadership is also about taking requests and feedback back up the chain. To lead your group of people to say, we need time to make this effective change. We need more resource to help us learn. We need X, Y, Z so that this change can be successful in our team, our department, or our area. And we're working with a great customer, sort of in the luxury retail area, and there were some really interesting observations. It was led by the CIO, so the Chief Information Officer, and this person was fantastic, truly engaged, very excited, and more than willing to sponsor and show and share support and get involved in the project. So from that perspective, the sponsorship was great. However, there was a lack of leadership from the business, despite best efforts. The coalition never really came together. There was a lack of team leads and area managers really coming together ahead of time. They weren't committed necessarily to putting their energy and effort into the change. And upon reflection, more work with senior leaders in this particular example could have started to corral some of those extra managers and leaders around the business to get involved. So that preparation to securing the coalition ahead of time was really key, but also going straight down to the organization first. So who are those people on the front line experiencing this change who need a hand? Let's listen to them, let's get their feedback, and then perhaps we can build some leadership upwards. They want to get involved. This team's really keen. These people over here just want to wait a couple of months because they're doing a massive CRM project. Whatever those leader thoughts might be, we can take them back and we can get those coalitions started so that the whole organization feels like they're moving as one. We also have a fantastic manufacturing customer. They are just over a year into their transformation, and we've probably seen the best engagement for a customer to date, and it is down to some of the proactive leadership we've seen. Senior management, but not the executives. And it's quite an unusual one, just to pause on that. There is, in all the theory, the idea that a senior sponsor must get involved, whether that's a C-suite person, a managing director, whoever that might be, must be there and must engage and give permission. And that is certainly true. That doesn't negate that statement. But what we found here in the manufacturing, it was actually the whole level down. So sort of that VP range, that senior management piece, they were the ones driving the change. They were given the mandate to make sure that 365 was successful, and they came together as a group of people and they prioritized all the changes in the business. And at the very top, for sort of 12 months to a year, was the successful transformation and use of Microsoft 365. From day one, they were engaged. They knew there were going to be some hurdles. They knew they were going to have to move people around, enable time, give people what they need. And they came together to make sure that managers and team leads were ahead of the curve. They weren't caught off guard. And then they were able to move through the initiative of change and share those ideas down to the business effectively. Effectively, we had 6 very well-connected senior leaders, or senior management in this case, who were cascading communications, but also listening and getting the feedback back up. So we had leadership from sort of the ground floor. These were people sharing their ideas, who were bringing people along that might be a bit resistant, getting excited and leading their teams. And then we also had from the top down, which was, this is happening. We want to give you time. We need you to listen, and we want to prepare you as best we can So let's meet in the middle and compromise so that we have the best potential for success for this change. I promised it wouldn't be death by PowerPoint. Thank you so much so far for 21 minutes. There's a few minutes left, and I just want to leave you with what can be done before we open up to Q&A. So myself and the team put together sort of the top 5. What are the top 5 things we can do from a leadership perspective that will help any change program, regardless of what it's focused on? And in no particular order, because all 5 of these sort of share the same weight, is build that coalition today across all levels of the organization and remind people that leadership is about the ability to lead and influence and guide others. It's not necessarily about command and control. And just bear in mind that leadership does not necessarily equal followship. So build that team, get people on board, understand that there's going to have to be give and take, and that momentum can then start to build on the change program you're focused on. Prepare executives and managers. They need time to learn, and that is they and employees. From the very top all the way down to the very bottom, it is a complete change. We need to know the knowledge and we need to know the ability. You cannot expedite experience. Someone sat me down once in Microsoft and said, doesn't matter how hard you work, you can't expedite experience. That comes from exposure. And there's only one thing that gets you experience, and that is time. We need time to learn, we need time to digest, and we need time to play and try out new ideas and new tools to see how they work. Listen to employees. We've all heard of desire as part of the outcome model, or we've all heard of the hook, or getting people's personal buy-in to the change. Listen, people will tell you what they want. It might take a few questions, peel the onion, as they say, ask why, ask what, ask how. And it can be, I just want to save those 5 minutes on Friday for the admin job, or I'm so tired of looking for a duplicate document on version 13, or why can't someone just tag me in X? There's a lot of people out there saying a lot of things, and there is probably an answer in the technology that we help turn on. Look for that hook, build it into the communications, and you'll get people committed. You need that individual commitment to change. After all, point number 3 on the previous slide, it is about individual change. Don't forget about the people. Multiple communication channels. The rule of 7. Sam's probably smiling at me in the background because it's a marketing term and he'll be pleased that I'm using it. The rule of 7 is real. Use as much communication material as possible to create the desire as well. And others will start to talk about it. Build some excitement, build some challenges, build some rumors, and you'll probably see there's a bigger uptake than perhaps we were first expecting. Final one, and if anyone's thought of this already, 10 points, feel free to cash them in at nothing at the end. However, throw it in the chat if you've thought about it already. We're actually all the leaders in change, which is probably the most cliche thing I've said all day and should be probably reserved for a LinkedIn post. However, we are all leaders in change. If it's a change that we believe in, if it's something we've bought into and we've made that personal commitment, or we've seen the potential outcome and we understand the return on investment, all of us can lead a change in one direction or another. And we have the influence over our friends, peers, colleagues, and managers, where we are also in that desire bracket. We can see the benefit. We want to bring, pull, or push people on that journey, and we all play a role in that leadership piece for change. Build coalition, prepare that we need time, find the hook, use as much communications as possible, and every single one of us can be a leader in successful change. Q&A. Sam, has anything come through in the chat?
Oh, it's been a bit quiet actually in the chat this afternoon, Ed. So I guess if anyone does have any questions, what I have done is I've popped both of our emails into the chat. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to take offline, please do feel free to email Ed or I after the session, and we'll be more than happy to help with your queries. But a massive thank you, Ed. That was an enlightening session, and I really do appreciate that. And I'm sure the attendees on this webinar thought the same. So finally then, just wrapping up, if you would like to take advantage of an initial free call with some of our change management experts, you can do that by clicking this link in the chat, which I'm just posting now. So that link will take you to a very, very short form. So please do feel free to fill that in, and we'll reach out to you to see how we can support you. But if there aren't any more questions, that will conclude today's webinar. Again, a massive thank you to Ed, and a massive thank you to everyone for joining today's session. We really do appreciate it. So on that note, from myself and Ed, have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are. I hope you found this webinar useful, and thanks again for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sam. Bye.